Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
And if the most serious flames are restricted to the upper edge, where Hanuman and his torched and balled up tail wreaks havoc, breaking off mid-flight parts of a turret with an arm, down here, the fire is only news, each scene of figures hidden behind the figure, alternate lives. At this lowest level, each foreshortened room is a place where anything could happen but the end of a life. I read it in the southern recension only. The Lankans resemble us in each and every of our refinements, as much as the wealth they cherished with such pride was left charred or smithereened. See how my tale is a brush of anger, how it shows every great work is unfinished.
After is a collection of poems inspired by Valmiki's Ramayana, one of Asia's foundational epic poems and a story cycle of incalculable historical importance. But after does not just come after the Ramayana. On each successive page, Vivek Narayanan brings the resources of contemporary English poetry to bear on the Sanskrit epic. In a work that warrants comparison with Christopher Logue's and Alice Oswald's reshapings of Homer and Anne Carson's autobiography of Red, Narayanan allows the ancient voice of the poem to engage with modern experience, initiating a transformative conversation across time. In this episode of BIC Talks, we have Vivek Narayanan in conversation with poet Mani Rao and author and translator Arshia Sattar.
Our epics are oceans of sorrow. Art, the breath of art, blows at it. It does not cleanse the image, but it cleanses the mirrors through which we look at ourselves. Today, our challenge is to return the epics to their depths, to reopen our clogged ears and listen to the primary sources. They have been in the market too long. They've become shiny, too shiny, or even falsified, and there are too many mirages. After is a book of poems inspired by Valmiki Ramayana, poems that respond to and reinvent intense moments from the epic. After is a response to Ramayana in itself, but it is much more, because there is no such thing as Ramayana in itself. There is always a context. After is, of course, a literary category with many precedents. Ramayana has had numerous afterlives, and we do not even need to believe that there is any Ur text or original, any starting point, but every Ramayana shares the name, like a patronymic or gotram. What is the relationship of after to translation? In a document that Vivek shared with me in 2019, he had said, "My method for this is open and evolving. The grammatical, linguistic, metrical, psychic, and aesthetic distance between the trigger text and our understanding of poetry in English today may well be too great to make anything remotely like a straightforwardly faithful translation, except as an academic exercise. This is a potentially exciting problem, providing that the contemporary poet still writes herself through the features, textures, and narrative contradictions of the original, rather than simply bypassing them altogether." That being stated, and yet, having examined some of the poems, I can say that they show the conscientiousness of a translator. An example I can share is a poem towards the beginning of the book titled Shiva. It's a meditation on Shiva's semen as it inundates the earth. At first, I read it and thought, oh, come on. And then I did my due diligence, of course, and thanks to the endnotes, I simply looked up the sources for this poem or fragment, and to my horror and delight, I found that the anecdote is indeed in the Valmiki Ramayana. Next, I found that even the details of the poem echoed the details and the implications of the original and brought it alive. After is like an orchestra. The more you listen to it, the more it expands. And one catches minor instruments, aesthetic sensitivity, ethical sensitivity. I'll point out some obvious minor points that leapt out for me. Vivek calls Vanaras simians and does not use the word rakshasas. He calls them anti-gods or asura angels sometimes. And there are a number of gems in here. Some may or may not be intended, may or may not be even conscious. For instance, when I see the word sight in the poem Ayodhya, which repeats, and you mentioned Sita's kitchen also in that, it reminds me of Sita because you use sight with a capital S. Sight is used with a capital S number of times, and each time I looked at it, I was reading Sita, and that told me that Sita is also a sight. The larger feat, I think, though, is how after echoes the intense detail as well as the temporal structure of the Ramayana. We know that Valmiki is much more than narrator. He's a character in the Ramayana. The story that he first witnesses seems to suck him in. When Sita takes refuge in Valmiki's ashram, the story arrives at Valmiki's present, who automatically becomes its contemporary witness. Can you imagine it? The sorrow in Valmiki's womb. Likewise, the poems of after also pull over into Vivek's and our present. I see how Vivek has embraced the deep structure of the epic and rewired it. It's also a memoir, a cultural and a personal memoir. And for me, this is the meaning of smriti. You can call it inner meaning if you like, a template and a memoir. A template that we may adore, emulate, challenge, denounce, but we're compelled to respond to it because we are in its grip and we inherited it. Naturally, many poems in after suddenly connect to personal histories, and of course the personal is political. In Alpasankhi, a poem, which the author tells us means remainder, residue, when his father tells him to keep the foreskin clean, I am immediately reminded of the foreskin as a marker of identity. And yes, of course I know what else this story is about. The author is pointing out residue, saying, clean up, people. It is hard to say into whose skin the authorial voice enters, and I mostly think it is that of Valmiki. Discussing the racial coding of old narratives, Vivek writes, Valmiki no longer the ridiculous lily-white Vaishnavite with the pedantic look. Instead, that so rare poster you saw once in a side room of a temple dedicated to him in Delhi, young, angry, and already with the glare and hurt of true witness. Such commentarial inputs and poems on the theme direct us to interrogate previously received narratives and reopen the Ramayana. As I recall, this book has taken over a decade of immersion and study, not just of Valmiki's telling, but of the many, many tellings. It shows the discipline of a scholar, the responsiveness of a translator, and the art of a poet. With that, I hand over to Vivek, and we'll have more conversations after we hear from the book.
Thank you so much, Mani, and I'm so happy to be doing this with you as a fellow traveler who was mining the classical texts long before I was, and also Arshia, who is also another trigger for the book as well, and I mean, I don't even know how this happened. I mean, I had zero interest in the Ramayana, and suddenly I find myself, 10 years here, and it was all because of a workshop that she called for us to read her Valmiki, and that's when I first realized that it wasn't the book that I thought it was, and that I had all kinds of completely wrong ideas about it, that for instance, that it was the most devotional Ramayana or whatever, or things that people believe. And that's so often the case with our texts, isn't it? We don't read them because we think we already know what's in them, so when we read them, it can be startling. There are 7 books of Valmiki, and each one is pretty distinct. It's a whole landscape, it's a mood, it's an approach. His 7 books became the 4 books of after, which are City and Forest, Dreams and Nightmares, War, and then After. And very hard to figure out what to read, but what I've been doing is sort of giving people a taste of each of the 4 books. So that's what I'm going to do here. Kujantam Rama Rameti Maduram Maduraksharam Aroha Kavitasyakam Vande Valmiki Kokilam Yipiban Satatat Ram Charitramritra Sagaram Atir Prasthan Munim Vande Prachetasam Kalmasham. To Valmiki. Cooing Ram, Ram, softly, so softly, perched on an upper branch, the koel called Valmiki, who drinks again and drinks again of that Ram saga nectar, taking his own pain to those sorrow seas. Here, where by Shiva's laser eye, desire became a wisp of smoke forever free from the body, where in the tangle of trees and in the limbs and shoots that bind among them, the wind's fury entered the joints of beautiful boys and girls and bent them crooked, where the sons of Sagara were born to dig the soil and tear the earth in search of a stolen horse, their progeny turned to heaps of ashes, where the river Ganga brought the land to life after such devastation, only that the Asura angels might hope on to some settled end. Here, where memory burns like fat in the wildfires and in the altars that seek to tame them, where the deer is still afraid and the hunter blind. This forest was never new, Rama. It's not yours, not even after you've mastered it. Fond in your bramble that pricks and protects. The rains lashed unabated, the tanks filled and communicated, the loch below, the nothing of that shrunken landscape, and you, and of you. Chitrakuta. To that mountain paradise set on fire by the red blossoms of the Kimsaka tree, honeycombs hanging like buckets, marking nut trees, the cry of the moorhen, the peahens bleat, the herds of elephants and the echoing of birds. They arrived with open eyes. Sita gathered firewood and fruit while the brothers caught and killed some quick deer, rabbit, wildfowl. Famished, they ate on the riverbank. The next day, readying for the long darkness ahead, Lakshmana sacrificed a black antelope with a splotch of red between its horns. Arrows removed, bleeding stanched. The animal was gently strangled, then laid down with its legs to north, then stroked and pleasured, cleaned in all the openings through which its life spirit had fled. Mouth, nose, eyes, ears, navel, penis, anus, hooves. In the beginning, the gods accepted man as victim. Later, the ability to be sacrificed passed from him into the antelope and horse, from horse into cattle, from cattle into sheep, from sheep into goat, then from goats into the earth, so all the world was touched by our humility, our complicity. Outside the leaf-thatched hut, the animal was raised on a spit and roasted until it attained a deep dark brown color. Then, chanting the appropriate verses, taking care not to split the bones, Rama carves the animal limb by limb, cut by cut, setting aside the grain of its hair, the pumice of its skin, taking into him only the fire of the flesh, the fat of its marrow. I always think about reading this poem about Dasharatha's, but it's the thing is that it's considered inauspicious, and I always chicken out because in case there's anybody with living parents. So instead, what I'm going to read is Bharata's story. So when Dasharatha dies, Bharata has no idea any of this is going on, and in fact, they don't tell him. So he's just called back, and then he arrives. And then he finds out his father's dead. So I'm going to read you two poems around that. Bharata's arrival. No, 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 no. No, no. Aho, 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 hala, hala, hala. Grayness drops on Ayodhya. The sky is grey, and the flanks of the buildings too. It's as if the fresh paint that adorns and brightens sculpture has been stripped away to show the fire-blackened stone below. Grayness drops. No one's in the street. No diyas in the halls where hundreds gathered. Grayness, which is also the cold of a handle that will no longer turn. Bharata. The messenger never told him his father was dead. He arrived to reach and was numbed by the instruction or the fear of consequence. The messenger never told him his father was dead. The skies were darkening and shrunk from him. On the long journey through woods and lands, with the clarity of an underwater sun, the animals were credulous but afraid. And Ayodhya, completely cipher, silent and abandoned. The messenger never told him his father was dead until the preservation in sesame oil. The nurses were kind but private. A cloth covered the penis. They refused to remove it. The messenger never told him his father was dead. The blankness of the expression, the eyes closed, indifferent, as if the old man were still asleep. Clang of the crematorium door, dead weight and the knowing of it. The city given up but watching. The messengers never told him his father was dead. So we'll move on to book 2 now, Dreams and Nightmares, and really the second part of book 2, which is sort of Lanka. But as you've seen, that there are various ways in which I suppose the book exists in a place where all periods exist, time periods exist together and interrupt each other, and the imagined and the real also exist together. That's something that picks up steam as the book goes on, and then we get to the present day by the end of it. So this is called Hanuman Among the Satellites. The earth curved athwart its thin blue reach, impotence of evidence. So when Hanuman briefly understood his powers, changed from cat's eyes, grew large, the yellow misleading skies called to him. The rushing blackness of the galaxies called to him. And before any thought, he was swishing in air, tail by itself to mimic the comet streaks, bright red but a lantern. And in the farther stratosphere, this most innocent of innocents, commingled with the man-made aerials, their steady, spidery frames, what they said to the inconsolable flare of cities below. Reason is the overrated husband of anger. Reason is half the knowledge of heart. And with the perfection of Sanskrit in the ape lips came the whispering self-assurances that wherever people wear beasts for skin, beasts wear people's skin. Each own music that milled inside. Yeah, so this poem is called Notes on the Burning of Lanka. There's images in the book, and the reason for this is that I got interested in looking at the Ramayana painting tradition, and especially some of these painters. I was startled because I realized that they were actually reading the epic very closely, and that sometimes you would see something. Often see Valmiki. Sometimes the most intense and deep moments sometimes will just happen in half a line. If you miss it, it's gone, kind of thing. And in these paintings, I was finding that they were picking up all of this, and I would see that half line in the painting. So I started to think of the paintings really as translations in their own right, and started looking at it. And there was one particular, it was an unfinished 18th century. It's a drawing. It was never colored in, and it's about Hanuman's burning of Lanka. So, if you recall, right, that Sita has been kidnapped by Ravana, and he's keeping her captive, but he doesn't touch her, but he sort of keeps her captive, and so they spend a long time, actually for a long time in the Valmiki, they don't know where Sita is, and they don't know if she's dead or alive. But eventually they find out, and then of course Hanuman takes his leap across the ocean and meets her. But on his way out, he decides to kind of just leave a sort of bruise, damage the city of Lanka, right? And then he gets captured. And what they do is they, put cloth on his ball and they set the tail on fire. Then what he does is, Sita has given him sort of magic such that he doesn't feel the fire on his tail. And so then he goes and uses the tail to set the city of Lanka on fire. right? And I think many of us know this story, right? But we always think of it as a sort of heroic and comic story and so on, even comic, right? And in Valmiki, at first, you see this kind of heroic rasa. But then a strange thing happens, which is that you begin to see the ordinary Lankans suffering in the fire. And particularly you see a Rakshasi woman with a child at her breast who is burning in this fire. And I spoke to a Sanskrit that says that can't be a mistake. You would never put a woman and child in the middle of a war scene unless you were making a point. And of course, then you go and see all through the classical text, there's a deep ambivalence about fire, about the use of fire. And I'm going to read the Kautilya thing, which explains why Kautilya, the political theorist, why he advises against the use of fire. And in fact, Hanuman himself, Hanuman is interesting because he's I think he's the only character in Valmiki who has an internal monologue. So he's constantly questioning himself and he's doubting himself and he's wondering if he's done the wrong thing. And he starts to worry, like maybe I killed Sita in the process because this fire is going to spread through. So this is a long poem that kind of explores that. So what was interesting is that in this unfinished painting, there she was, the Rakshasi woman burning in the fire. So then I knew the painters had seen it too. The painters had noticed it as well. What's important to me really is that the Ramayana is for everyone, that it's a text of world literature, and everybody, for me, should be invited to kind of participate in it and make it their own and so on and so forth. And so I've been trying to put it in conversation. In this case, I put it in conversation with sort of two other burnings and a drowning. So one of them is this American poet, Robert Duncan, and he has a poem about looking at, the famous photograph of the woman burning from napalm and what it means to look at that photograph of the woman burning. And that he's also a reference to a British poet, Robert Southwell, who was imprisoned. And so he has this picture of the Christ kind of burning in this kind of fire that doesn't affect him. And so intricate. And the final one is a Chilean poet, Latin American poet called Raul Zurita. And I use an installation that he did at the Kochi Biennale called Sea of Pain. And that's about, the Syrian photograph of the Syrian. And so part of the poem is also about, I found myself exploring how do we learn to feel things for others who may be far away or may be different from us? Is it possible? And how does the image participate in that? Are images something that we can use to feel things for others and or not, or maybe there's this. So those are some of the questions I kind of explore. And each of the books in the book have epigraphs which are meant to kind of illuminate that particular book. So I'll read the second two of these quotes for this poem. The first is Robert Duncan. I think I could bear it. I cannot think I could bear it. And then, of course, there's Kautilya. For fire cannot be trusted. It not only offends gods, but also destroys people, grains, cattle, gold, raw materials, and such. Also, the acquisition of a fort with its property all destroyed is a source of further loss. So the unfinished painting, which I'll be showing you, is first generation after Nansok, in case anybody is interested. Notes on the burning of Lanka. 1. They bound Hanuman's tail with cloth, dipped it in oil, set it alight, dancing in the streets, beating drums. And this was the reply. Sky-rocketed fury, time obliterating, steeped in ladders, messaged by the wind, fiercing itself on the horses and the houses, combing, combining, Minerals were melted, the stone of the grander houses baked, the wood of the pagodas split, jaws that fell apart, the gables edged in gold, the pediments with pearls, and the shouts of the Lankans rushing to rescue with looks of hopelessness, their belongings. Really, this fury has come to us as Simeon, and it only grows, tongue slaked, it's found its butter in our Lankan flesh, bodies dropped in that black smoke, flared like comets come to ground. A woman fell, holding her baby close, enveloped by the glow, disheveled hair. The flame tips wavered in places like Kimsuka blossoms, elsewhere like shalmali, sometimes flowers of saffron. You could not accuse those flame tips of neglecting the finer work. Often they moved with seeming deliberation, ignored what was in front of them to cower or sideways leap, glanced at a distance through doorways with sullen explosions. The city of Lanka, thus zapped before even the fact of war, like Tripura by a half-attentive Rudra, tore across the mountain plateau, the scourge that had lit the sky, smokeless splendor, sacrificial ghee, thunderbolt boom, circles of ire, lit the clouds, decorated their fringes. And who moves behind what moves? Is it the monarch of the gods with lightning in his pocket? Or the lord of death witnessed by the very eyes? Or the god of the water? Or the controller of air? Or the keeper of the fire? Or the charioteer of the sun? Or, by night, the iridescent assistant? Or perhaps the celestial tax collector? This ain't no Simeon, that's for sure. This is time, in person, on a house call. That's what they said, those best Lankans gathered upon the shady curtain that had covered living beings and dwellings and trees and a city. Some climbed to get a better view, the dimmed noise of birds, of elephants, of flailing vestibules and musky-smelling gardens. O Father, O Son, O Lover, hey husband, friend, O life once full of fortune. 2. Just as the flame can waver and switch sympathies, might not also the rage-cooling warrior or the onlooker, the filter who speaks with that hoarse, trebled voice? Knee-deep in the herding of it, the altar cannot be forgiven. This fire so complete that innocents were wasted in its appetite, that even Sita, kept in the Ashokan grove amid the by-lanes of the city, could surely, as one stands here, be cinders too. Fire, that which, unhindered, translates itself. We want to look and feel something, reaching the spirit to tear it there. The orchestration of it defeats us. We want to act like its hunger has us at need. Hanuman's tail, for instance, to him is but an earthly glow. He cannot feel the weapon he wields. The tail is like a whisper he sets upon what it touches. And when the citizens bind that bush tail with cloth, knowing it to be his ornament, his favorite part, his writing hand, when they squealingly dip it in kerosene, take a torch to it, this proves to be no more than a message to themselves, just as fortune-dealing skycraft dial to this day in our names, our wages. Long dreaming, the immolation from air attracted it to us, and the bodies fell lightly in arches of smoke. 3. Robert Duncan, in his book Groundwork, may or may not meant it when he read Southwell's Babe as cold fire of the tormenting image, unforgivably double, without truth's heat, he wanted to say, calling to the burning Vietnamese woman as if she were sweet fate itself, knowing that even Southwell on the rack had felt the love that was fire, the smoke that was shame, the ashes that were scorns. He leaves no shadow where he dances in the air of misery below. Finagled the future, the effort to create voice and setting, only the last stirs from the eyes of the dead. And speech volunteers for the job in its pathetic way, searching for the streak of the wind god's sun on the line horizon, his tail that helpless agent. But something is there in the crypt of the memory, its residue. I saw Valmiki's tears. Tell me I'm not confused. Saw the wish for the cut through centuries of pain. Think of the late 18th century and swipe to this unfinished painting attributed to the family of Naensuk. Invisible fire scribbles its own marks on the carefully trained lines. The charpoy is heaved over the terrace wall in an attempt to save it. And down below, that woman with a baby in the smallest, nearest corner of this draft that like a ghost moves across its own shadow. Could she also be Duncan's girl photographed by napalm? Not quite. She has teeth enough and flappy ears and elegant horns, and a belly button being the echo of nipples. Around her, the ordinary is almost unaltered. The actuary at his bath, the delivery boy with a heap on his head, calls today with a warning. And if the most serious flames are restricted to the upper edge, where Hanuman and his torched and balled up tail wreaks havoc, breaking off mid-flight parts of a turret with an arm, down here, the fire is only news. Each scene of figures hidden behind the figure, alternate lives. At this lowest level, each foreshortened room is a place where anything could happen but the end of a life. I read it in the Southern Recension only. The Lankans resemble us in each and every of our refinements, as much as the wealth they cherished with such pride was left charred or smithereened. See how my tale is a brush of anger, how it shows every great work is unfinished. 5. To Raul Zurita and his translator, Ana Dini Morales. Hanuman, as the being who must never stop examining himself, as also the person of accidental and helpless error, was not an angry simian, but one, alas, not unaccustomed to war. And thanks to Sita's spell, the fire he carried was unconscionably cold to him, not inadequate, but otherworldly, whether from matter or the glimmering surface of the soul. For the worst of any fire image is just the certainty of the ability to look upon it. The shots were on YouTube. The chyrons leapt like flame tips. As in Zurita, we made love among the ashes. My God is a little boy, he said. My God is a fat man. At Kochi, I wandered through seas of pain and felt nothing but light. Was that what we call the cruelty of the image? In that cruelty withheld what you lived with. Mi Dios no llora, mi Dios no siente. How do we feel, Raul? I asked you, when every feeling has so far to travel. The skies are cold and icy. The deserts lick us with their tongues. Sabes que estás muerta para el amor y no amas. You know you're dead for love and don't love. No replies from beyond the pale. The image's dharma is to manipulate. He doused his tale, en la patria muerta del mar, in the dead homeland of the sea. Raul, Valmiki is clear. The origin of poetry is in violence. It's the parts that didn't fit hurt us. And the waves moved like tracings on the planet. And the time-squishing screen disappeared. The very first salve of the war that lasted forever. 6. Night flight from Lanka. The mountain was its highest deodars, standing as if with lifted arms. Red horns of palmyra trees, rows of home gardens on the slope. An upper garment of clouds hung between the peaks, as if awakened by love was the sun's stealing pierce of rays. It revealed pockets of metal, like eyes drawing up lids. Water broke from every side, and the rushing stream sang the mantras, the highest pitch of them, above the continual roar. Trembling in the approaching umbra, the wan autumnal groves fluted through bamboos on the wind. This mountain peak was the same living wingless traveler that Hanuman would now use for his return launch. The moon is light from a lily, the sun a water bird. The Pushya and Shravana constellations are swans, the clouds are the Shaivala weeds. The twin Punarvasu for fish and Mars for a crocodile. Airavata, Indra's massive tusker, reflected in the Mahadvipan islands. The high breeze for the low gales at sea, and the moonbeams for the cool of the surf lines. Like a long ship crossing the ocean by the power of wind was Hanuman. exhaustless leap in the mirror of up or down, swallowing the sky, scratching the orbits, dragging the stars and the sun through cloud and wave. So we'll go on to book 3, War. I'll talk about the majority of book 3 is a long poem, which I'll say a little bit about in a second. But I don't know if I say fun. It's the War. The Book of War is actually obviously a very dark and pessimistic book. But all the classical texts across the classical world have these omens of bad times coming kind of thing. So these 2 poems I'm going to read are both called Some Omens, and they're collections of omens, if you like. Some omens. Dogs ate the ceremonial offerings. Donkeys were born to cows and rats to mongooses. Cats slept with leopards, pigs with dogs. Kinnaras fucked rakshasas and humans, red-footed doves in the air. The time spirit had shaved his head. He looked our way, cast a grudging eye on whatever we had. Some omens. Wood against wood shoots spark. The fire mantra is in the house of fire. But a black smoke swallows and smudges it out. Creepy crawlies in the kitchens. Little red ants discerned in the sacred offering. No must oozes from the foreheads of elephants. No trace of milk on the aging cow. Horses, though still content with their daily supply, yearn fearfully. Donkeys, camels, mules, sobbing. Swarms of crows on the balconies of high buildings. My first, my second, that wears oblations at the edge of the city. The vast ruins that still ruled and gave heft to the surrounds. And this is from a different book called the Shukraniti, which again is a sort of advice for king. From the Shukraniti. Road saboteurs, casual slanderers, wall jumpers, ruiners of water reservoirs and of houses, ditch fillers, publishers of the king's imperfections. Trespassers into inner apartments, into bedrooms, into storerooms, trespassers in the kitchen, wedding and party and private dinner crashes, those who spit or pass wind before the king, those who sit in heroic postures in front of him, those who just remain seated when he enters the room, those who dress better than the sovereign, those who approach him impatiently, those who enter by back doors, those who come at the wrong hour, those who take naps in the royal beds, those who lounge on royal seats, those who borrow the monarch's sandals, those who doze off in front of him, those who sit on seats not offered, those who climb in view of the king, those who relax when he reclines, those who reach into their pockets for betel or tobacco and calmly begin to chew, those who talk or speak without permission, those who insult or defame the monarch, those who appear before him wearing only a single cloth, those who come with oil-rubbed skin or disheveled hair or shamelessly painted bodies or garlands, those who shake their clothes about when they walk, who seek an audience with their heads covered, who wear hats, those who are skilled in the picking of pockets, those addicted to gambling and drink, those who study too hard their own noses, ears, and eyes, those who pick at their teeth, those who dig at their ears with fingers or implements in his presence, those who blow their nose before the king. These are the 50 discourtesies. So the majority of the Book of War is a long poem, collages images of war in Valmiki with 2 archives. One, a report on 432 cases of torture in Kashmir, and another involving the assassination of martyrs and sort of Maoist martyrology. Basically, the kinds of things that the Indian state has been up to in the past 20 years or so. I'm not going to read from that because I won't be able to do justice to it in this poem, but I say this because just like most people don't realize that the book of Yuddha Kanda is actually Valmiki's longest book. And it's relentlessly pessimistic, and it actually shows there's a point where things get so clouded that people can no longer tell their own side from the other, and they're killing people on their own side and things like that. And so it's a very dark and pessimistic book. And when I brought it into conversation with the present, I felt like I'd left an open wound or something like that. So that's when I realized, how so many poets in the last of their books, want to try and kind of have an imagination of paradise. So anyway, I'll start with reading the epigraphs to book 4, which is after. First one, the Hindus wanted an epic, and they have sent for Valmiki, who was an untouchable. The Hindus wanted a constitution, and they sent for me, B.R. Ambedkar. This is from a West African epic called Gasire's Lute. 4 times Wagadu rose, a great city gleaming in the light of day. 4 times Wagadu fell and disappeared from human sight. Once through vanity, once through dishonesty, once through greed, once through discord. 4 times Wagadu changed her name. And then this last one is from a British philosopher, Gillian Rose, Love's work. And she's talking about the Arthur legend here, but it resonated with what happens to Rama in the Uttarakhanda. Whatever King Arthur chooses, whether to overlook the betrayal or prosecute the crime, the choice is not the issue. For one way or another, the king must now be sad. Let's stick with the Rakshasas for a second, just to, and I guess to sort of underline that point. So this is a collage of Rakshasas mostly in the last book of the Ramayana. It's called the nobility of the Rakshasas. Like all the other beings, Danavas, Ashuras, Daityas, who fell from favor when order pretended to arrive. Like all those returned as the ocean did after touching its shores. The Rakshasas always pursued their own excellence and stasis. They studied the sacred texts. They gave to charity. They performed the prescribed and inscribed rituals. They achieved lives free of sickness. They stood firm in their dharma, and like a lion chased by a sharaba, like an elephant hunted by a lion, like leopard by tiger, like a dog by a leopard, like a cat by a dog, like a snake by a cat, like a rat by a snake, so too were the Rakshasas subdued or decimated in battle. Think of the great Kumbhakarna, the ardors he undertook with steady mind in a quadrangle of fires while the sun blazed overhead, or when he was soaked to the bone and balanced on one knee in the rains, or in winter the whole of him held underwater. Kumbhakarna, on whose behalf Saraswati, the goddess of poetry, once spoke. More than anything, the Rakshasas were our equals, and later friends with the simians too, in their subjecthood. And even Ravana, his earlier career as a serial rapist, known and hated, who had gone so far as to murder his own sister's husband, even he once said, "I was crazy for victory, but in the blind heat of war, I could no longer tell my own side from the others." And Lanka, that city built by those fleeing from Vishnu, that city of the endless vistas engineered by Vishvakarma, the years of prosperity it had as a capital, the thousands and thousands of happy Rakshasas who thronged to it. Many people probably don't know this because it's kind of a suppressed story, right? And it doesn't appear in the later Ramayanas, but there's an uncomfortable and painful thing that happens in the Uttarakhanda, which is that, a Brahmin who has lost his son comes up to Rama and says, the reason why I've lost his son is because now everybody is doing tapas. Whoever they, and so even lower caste people are engaging in tapas. So we have to do something about it. We have to right the caste system. And by the way, the caste system is pretty blurry for most of the Ramayana. It's only really in the last book that it kind of rears its head, as it were. So Rama goes and he has to kill Shambhuka. And I think that there are traces of his guilt that you see even in Valmiki, but it comes out very clearly in Bhavabhuti, which is a later play where, Rama has to also face up to the guilt of what he's done and kind of process that as a human king, that side of him that remains a human king. So, okay.
No, not you.
We have half an hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
5:30, 20 minutes.
Okay, then in that case, I'm gonna skip to the last poem, right? That makes sense. Because I want to do this last poem. It's called To Shaheen Bagh in Absentia, which was these protesters against the Citizenship Amendment Act, which I think you will all remember. And it opens with a quote from Faiz, Pakistani poet, and then it ends with a song called Maitrim Bhajata, which was sung by M.S. Subbulakshmi at the United Nations, and it was written by the 68th Shankaracharya of Kanchi, who I think was an interesting figure. I don't know much about him, but he wrote this poem, which I will read at the end of this, To Shaheen Bagh in Absentia. Bas naam rahega Allah ke, jo gayab bhi, hazir bhi, jo manzar bhi, nazir bhi. Yes, the name alone will stay, the unseen still here, and the thing seen being also the observer. I wasn't there at Shaheen Bagh, those winter days when thousands gathered, when it seemed all of Delhi, in the brilliance of its inventiveness, in the earnestness of its grit, was there. Is it true the roads almost belonged to us? That we took in faces with such renewed curiosity, and song stuttered forth in the unbeliever's hands? I've known what it means to rub shoulders in a place like that, when the glance of touch and the touching glance slipped like its own innocent being through the evening's rush. This melancholy distance of the seen and the dareness of the unseen. The way something will sprout at the most innocuous traffic light, an idea or body or refurbishable item, and soon the corner will come to that, and only that, and the goods and the minutiae of traffic and crowds will learn to flow around it in both impatience and attentive embrace. I wasn't there at Shaheen Bagh in those first days of its glory, to see it hold this way, clasped to memory and habit. But whatever happens, the name will stay, swim to the skies above us, given as a token to the witness of paradise and the real blood it asked of us. Excuse my Sanskrit mistakes, but this is Maitrim Bhajata, a translation for Padma Narayanan, who's my mother, who's also a translator. Maitrim Bhajata, Akhila Hrijitrim, Atma Deva Paranapi Pashyata, Yuddham Tyajata, Spardam Tyajata. Tyajata pareshu akramam akramanam. Janani prithvi kama dugaste. Janako devaha sakala dayalu. Damyata datta dayadvam janataha. Shreyo bhuyat sakala jananam. Grow friendship at the heart. See other souls as you see your own. Give up war. Give up competition. Give up the acquisition or occupation by force. Invent, thrash out, and make real the three Das. Damyata, Datta, Dayadvam. Restraint, charity, mercy, and prosperity for all the peoples. Thank you.
So obviously this is a very special book to me because we started it unknowingly 10 years ago. And the first poem that Vivek wrote is called Ayodhya, which was written 10 years ago, and it's in the book. I would have read it, but I'll keep the time for your questions to Vivek. I think it's clear that among the many other excellent things in After, Vivek has restored to the text and the story, as Mani has in her wonderful translation of the Bhagavad Gita, Vivek has restored poetry. The Ramayana is a poem in every language in which it is traditionally written. Sanskrit, Tamil, Awadhi, Kannada. But it is unusual and rare to have a poetic response to the entire Ramayana in English. I will go further and say that Vivek's After is not simply a response to the Ramayana. It is, like those that have come before, a Ramayana in itself. From Valmiki onwards, and actually even if you think of the 7-book text that is attributed to Valmiki, the Ramayana has always been told as a story of its own time and place. If you look at Kamban, you look at the physical location with the flora and the fauna. If you think of Ramcharitmanas and the extreme anxiety about Sita and women who are not cloistered, look at Kritibasa and you realize actually the most important person in the Bangla Ramayana is not Rama, it's Monasha, the goddess of the snakes. And so it is that Vivek's After is a Ramayana for the 21st century. At first acquaintance, we might think that Vivek has stepped away from the traditional Ramayana. But the more time we spend with After, the more we realize how closely he has stayed with the structure and the spirit of the traditional story. There is a terrible foreboding even in the idyllic days of the forest. In Kishkinda, there is a playfulness and wonder, and our imagination soars with the monkeys. Sundarakanda is beautiful, but its beauty is doomed, and it carries the weight of impending tragedy. But it is in the after, the Uttarakanda, the epilogue, that it is truly dark, especially in Sita's absence, first in her banishment, and then in her apotheosis, when she leaves behind her husband, her children, and all the social expectations that she has been made to carry for such a long time. And it is in the last section of his book that Vivek explodes into contemporary times. Violence, killing, injustice, prejudice, hatred. There's a poem on Akhlaq. There's, of course, Shahin Bagh, which you read, Ramtek, which turns into a meditation on Shambhuka's killing. But I've been intrigued by the fact that so many contemporary retellings or transformations of the Ramayana see Ayodhya without Sita, or Ayodhya after Sita, as dystopic. You can look at Samhita Arni's Missing Queen, Ashok Bankar, even Amish, the great devotee, will tell you that Ayodhya is dystopic. It is a place of discipline and unfreedom. It has its secrets. We live well, but it's the price that we pay for silence and obedience, however unwilling that is. This Ayodhya is in direct contrast to the idea of Ramarajya, the golden age that will prevail under Rama's righteous rule. But even in the traditional Ramarajya, Rama needs a statue of his banished and vanished wife to complete the picture, and for him to be the righteous king that is his destiny. So the point I want to make is this. We are persuaded to receive Rama as the Maryada Purushottama, the man of dharma, the exemplar of righteousness. But in fact, it is Sita who is the moral center of the story. Without her, I believe that Rama loses the true north of his own moral compass and flounders in his quest for righteousness. There's a moment in the forest where Sita speaks, possibly for the only time, as a woman. Not as a wife, not as a sister, not as a daughter. And she says to Rama, put down your weapons. You will call violence to yourself. You will be tempted to kill innocent creatures. And of course he says, which is also in Vivek's book, he says, okay, thanks, but this is how women speak. More trouble for him, because the next thing he does is cut off Shurpanakha's ears and nose, and we know where that leads, right? While Sita is with him, Rama rejects the violence of Kshatriya dharma twice. Once in private with Lakshmana, and the other time when Bharata comes to the forest to persuade Rama to take the kingdom back. With Sita, Rama is a son, a husband, a brother, a prince in exile, a man cruelly and unjustly treated by the intrigue and politics of the royal court. Without Sita, he is only a king, a Kshatriya who must live by the code of the warrior and the ruler. I'm not going to be so silly as to say that the Ramayana is a feminist text, far from it, as we all know. But as a feminist, I am drawn to the idea of a woman as the moral center of such a masculinist text. That is the Ramayana that I can relate to, that I can think of as my own. But this Ramayana is the one that I have to search for, the one that I have to excavate from a text that was created 2,000 years ago. So many of us have disowned the Ramayana. It's patriarchal, it's sexist, it's casteist, I don't like Rama, I really like Krishna, I don't believe in God. And because we have disowned the Ramayana, others have made it their own. And because we have been silent about our readings of the beauty and meaning that we may find in it, these others have thrust their readings of the text upon us, dividing us into Ramzadeh and Haramzadeh. A chilling, very clever phrase that is absolutely terrifying to somebody like myself. As I said earlier, each Ramayana speaks from its own time and its own place. The problem begins when we think that what was true for that time and space is true for us here and now. After is a Ramayana of our times, because like all the others that have come before, it uses the present as a lens through which to view and tell the great story. After allows us to own the Ramayana. We can see its beauty and its horrors. We can claim what we like and enter into dialogue with the things that disturb us. That, for me, is Vivek's magnificent achievement. The Ramayana is now utterly contemporary. Left the room. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Manira.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.